You are now listening to Hinckley Community Radio, a non-profit podcast radio station.
Late at night, on the 11th of June or early morning of the 12th of June 1962, 4 inmates decided that they no longer wanted to be prisoners on the Rock, or as it was known throughout the penal system, Alcatraz. At the time, it was considered to be the most secure prison in the United States. However, the 4 men hatched a plan that would ultimately prove the inescapable prison wasn't so secure after all. The mystery began from the moment prison officials discovered the 4 men were missing. Regardless of various letters and clues, plenty of questions remain about the ultimate fate of the prisoners who had attempted to cross the treacherous San Francisco Bay. Hundreds of leads were pursued by the FBI and local law enforcement officials, but no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced favouring the success or failure of their attempt to escape. Various theories have been proposed by authorities, reporters, family members and amateur enthusiasts. But in 1979, the FBI officially concluded, on the basis of circumstantial evidence and a preponderance of expert opinion, that the men drowned in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay before reaching the mainland. However, the US Marshal's case file still remains open and active, and the 4 men remain on its wanted list. New evidence, both circumstantial and material, has continued to surface, stoking new debates on whether the inmates managed to survive. Greetings, unexplained peeps. Thank you for tuning in and listening to Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I am a crime buff, a paranormal investigator, and a remote viewer who is sceptical of anyone who claims they do yoga every day, because personally, I think it's a bit of a stretch. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the escape from Alcatraz. This week's necessary disclaimer: all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts still remain. I also apologise again if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, does need some elocution training at times. So, back to the story. United States Penitentiary, Alcatraz Island, also known as just Alcatraz or the Rock, was a maximum security federal prison on Alcatraz Island, 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, California. It has been the site of a fort since 1850s, with the main prison building having been constructed in 1910 to 1912 as a United States Army military prison. The United States Department of Justice took over the United States Disciplinary Barracks Pacific Branch for the Rock on the 12th of October 1933. The island became adapted and used as a prison in August 1934 after the buildings were modernised and the security was increased. Given this high security and the island's location in the cold waters and strong currents of San Francisco Bay, prison operators believed Alcatraz to be both America's strongest prison and escape-proof. The 3-storey cell house included the 4 main cell blocks: a block through D block, the warden's office, visitation room, the library, and a barber shop. The prison cells typically measured 9 feet by 5 feet and 7 feet high. The cells were primitive and lacked any privacy for their occupants. They were furnished with a bed, desk, wash basin, a toilet on the back wall, and a few items other than a blanket. 6 cells each end were designated the hole. Prisoners with behavioural problems were sent to these for periods of often brutal punishment. The dining hall and kitchen extended from the main building. Prisoners and staff all ate 3 meals a day together. Above the dining hall was the hospital. Prison corridors were named after major New York and Michigan US streets, such as Broadway and Michigan Avenue. Working at the prison was considered a privilege for inmates. Some were actively involved in providing for the military in jobs such as sewing and woodwork and performing various maintenance and laundry chores. Alcatraz was intended for prisoners who continuously caused trouble at other federal prisons. It would be a last resort prison to hold the worst of the worst who had no hope of rehabilitation. On the 11th of August 1934, the first batch of 137 prisoners arrived at Alcatraz from the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas, having travelled by rail to San Venetia, California. Before being escorted to Alcatraz, they were handcuffed in high-security coaches and guarded by some 60 Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI special agents, U.S. Marshals, and a railway security official. Most of the prisoners were notorious bank robbers, counterfeiters, or murderers. Alcatraz was the most frightening prison imaginable. This maximum security prison was designed with the sole purpose of keeping the most dangerous criminals away from normal society. Somehow, 3 prisoners managed to evade all of the prison's advanced security functions and escape. The escape from Alcatraz has become one of America's history's most famous unsolved crimes. Although some of the local officials claim that the 3 escapees drowned in the cold water, recently there have been clues that the prisoners managed to get away and have lived their lives as free men. A letter that arrived in 2018 has caused the FBI to reopen the investigation. So, what is the real story? Let's first take a look at the inmates that are central to our story. First up, Frank Lee Morris, born September the 1st, 1926. Frank was born in Washington, D.C. His parents abandoned him when he was 11, so he spent most of his childhood in foster homes and orphanages. At the age of 13, he was convicted of his first criminal offence, and by his late teens had been arrested for a multitude of crimes ranging from possession of narcotics to armed robbery. He spent most of his early years in jail, serving lunch to prisoners. Later, he was arrested for the grand larceny, car theft and armed robbery in Miami Beach. Frank Morris reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the general population in intelligence, as measured by an IQ score of 133. As a side note, the average IQ score today in the United States is 98. He served time in Florida and Georgia, then escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery. He was recaptured a year later while committing a burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January the 20th, 1960, as inmate number AZ1441. Frank Morris will be forever known as the man who orchestrated the Great Escape from Alcatraz. Next up, John and Clarence Anglin. John William, born May the 2nd, 1930, and Clarence, born May the 11th, 1931, were born into a family of 13 children in Donaldsonville, Georgia. Their parents, George Robert Anglin and Rachel Van Miller Anglin, were seasonal farm workers in the early 1940s. In the early 1940s, they moved the family to Ruskin, Florida, 20 miles south of Tampa, where the truck farms and tomato fields provided a more reliable source of income. Each June, they migrated north as far as Michigan to pick cherries. Clarence and John were reportedly inseparable as youngsters. They became skilled swimmers and amazed their siblings by swimming in the frigid waters of Lake Michigan as ice still floated on its surface. Clarence was first caught breaking into a service station when he was 14 years old. The brothers began robbing banks and other establishments as a team in the early 1950s, usually targeting businesses that were closed to ensure no one got injured. They claimed that they used a weapon only once during a bank heist, and that this turned out to be a toy gun. In 1958, John, Clarence and Alfred Anglin robbed the Columbia Savings Bank building in Columbia, Alabama. Both received 35-year sentences, which they served at Florida State Prison, Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, and then Atlanta Penitentiary. During their incarceration at the Atlanta Penitentiary, the Anglin brothers were caught trying to escape on numerous occasions, so John and Clarence were then transferred to Alcatraz. John arrived on October the 24th, 1960 as inmate AZ-1476, and Clarence on January the 10th, 1961 as inmate AZ-1485. Next was Alan West, March the 25th, 1929 to December the 21st, 1978. West was born in New York City. He was arrested over 20 times throughout his lifetime. He was imprisoned for car theft in 1955, first at Atlanta Penitentiary, then at Florida State Prison. After an escape attempt from the Florida facility, he was transferred to Alcatraz in 1957 at the age of 28 and became inmate number AZ-1335. The group of four had plenty of personal experience on how to escape, or try to escape, from various prisons. They pooled their knowledge and started working on a plan to achieve the impossible, an escape from the Rock. Over 30 inmates had tried to escape Alcatraz Island over the years, but none had succeeded. So, what would make this attempt any different? The four inmates all knew each other from previous lockups in Florida and Georgia. The plan for the escape was quite simple, but pulling it off was going to be nearly impossible. They would need the perfect coordination of the whole team to make it work. The plan would also demand every ounce of their bravery and all the resources they could possibly collect. In December 1961, they were assigned adjacent cells. Well, that was the first bad move on the warden's part. So that's when they began formulating an escape plan under the leadership of Frank Lee Morris. Over the subsequent 6 months, they widened the ventilation ducts beneath their sinks using discarded saw blades found on the prison grounds, metal spoons from the mess hall, and an electric drill improvised from the motor of a vacuum cleaner. The men concealed their work with painted cardboard. Yes, it was that simple. In the 1960s, it was decided that the inmates should be allowed an hour of music each day. So to mask the noise the gang were making, Morris would play his accordion as loudly as possible, on top of the already noticeable cacophonic din called music hour. Luckily for our intrepid heroes, Alcatraz at the time was not just a prison, but also a factory. The inmates worked as part of their sentence, giving them access to all the materials they needed. And they needed a lot of material. The team started putting their plan into action bit by bit. It was complicated, and some would even say ingenious. Not only were they going to escape the virtual fortress of Alcatraz, they were also going to make some look-alike dummies to leave in their place. Getting out of the prison was not enough, though. Our heroes also had to find a way to get off the island, and all the time